Hey guys, welcome to Advanced Biology, Mr. K's class at HTHS High School. Alright, so at this point you should have watched the Amoeba Sisters video on photosynthesis, and I just want to kind of hit up a few of the big points in this. Alright, so starting off with this particular diagram, we should realize that we are looking at a chloroplast, and we saw that in the Amoeba Sisters video that the chloroplast does consist of an inner membrane called the thylakoid surrounded by an outer membrane, and the fluid surrounding the inner membrane is called the stroma, and we learned about some things in that video about those areas. Okay, the other day after our walk outside, I went through and showed you a diagram that looks somewhat like this. The main point being that energy comes from the sun in the form of electromagnetic energy and then is transformed into chemical energy by the primary producers. And again, those primary producers would be all of the autotrophs, the plants, the photosynthetic protists, the photosynthetic bacteria, and so on. And of course, that chemical energy in the form of sugars is now going to be available to all of the heterotrophs, or the organisms that consume other organisms. And again, the largest number of those organisms are going to be the primary consumers, or herbivores, okay, which they will get the most energy out of those plants, okay. And then finally the secondary consumers who are consuming the primary consumers, and lastly our tertiary consumers, our top level predators and things. And as we talked about the other day, everything has to die. Everything is going to well, not everything, but all of the animals, things that we might consider an animal, are going to produce waste products in the form of poo and pee and things. And so the microorganisms are going to, or decomposers are going to then convert that matter back into other forms of matter that once again the primary producers can use. So the main point of this diagram was that energy flows through the system and eventually leaves the system as heat, while matter, i.e. the chemicals, the atoms and things like that, will be recycled over and over and over again. As we saw in the Amoeba Sisters video, again, plants are going to, plants are going to be primary producers, and then of course there are algae that are going to convert sun energy into chemical energy. And of course, there might even be some phytoplankton. Phyto means plant, so these are the plant-like protists and things of that nature. And we also mentioned bacteria, such as the blue-green bacteria. A lot of times you can see this in ponds. It's kind of like this filamentous stuff that might be in a pond or in a stream or a river and things. These are also photosynthetic. Animals, on the other hand, such as this orangutan, are heterotrophs and must eat other things, are decomposers. And of course, things like mushrooms and many of our small insects and bugs and even many bacteria are going to be heterotrophic, meaning that they have to get their energy from other organisms. Okay? And the amoeba sister, once again, we talked about the structure of the chloroplast. Where do we find the chloroplast? We find those in cells of plants and some protists and some algae and things like that. And in plants, generally, we're going to find the chloroplasts, those cells that contain chloroplasts, I should say, in the leaves. Now, in some other plants, like desert plants, they might have some adaptations where the leaves are not the sites of photosynthesis. Instead, it's almost the bark, if you will, like in a cactus. Cactus, the leaves have been modified into spines, and the bark, in quotation marks, is now the site where photosynthesis will take place, because that is green, and so that's where it will take place. Again, chloroplasts are green because green is the light being reflected, whereas all the other wavelengths of light are being absorbed. Okay, and as we went through the amoeba sisters, that these two, or I should say the photosynthesis is divided into two major reactions. The light reaction, which is where the sun's energy in the form of light is going to be converted into chemical energy in the form of ATP, and this other molecule we call NADPH. Okay. Also, in the light reaction, this is where water is going to be split and oxygen will be released. The second cycle, the Calvin cycle, referred to as the light independent cycle in the Amoeba Sisters video, is the place where we finally are going to take CO2, carbon dioxide, from the environment, and we are going to produce sugars from that carbon dioxide. How is this accomplished? It's accomplished by utilizing the products of the light-dependent reaction, the energy from ATP, and the high-energy electrons from NADPH. We will get into this in our next lecture, but you need to memorize this equation. We have 6 CO2 plus 6 water are going to produce C6H12O6 plus 6 O2 plus heat. Now, if I was going to say this in words, I would say we have 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 waters are going to produce 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen. Make sure you know how to utilize both of those phrases, the chemical formula itself and also the word formula. 2. And as you can see here, the red represents the light independent reaction / Calvin cycle, and the blue in the equation represents the light dependent reactions and where they're coming from. We talked a little bit about the how light is split up into different wavelengths. I do want you to notice on this graph that the shorter the wavelength is, the greater amount of energy it has. So the purples and the blues and the greens do have more energy than do the reds and the oranges. Okay? And remember, we see plants as being green because that is the color that plants do not absorb. That is the color they reflect. And in this particular picture, we are seeing all of the colors being absorbed by the pigment molecules inside the chloroplast, and the green is being reflected back. This was an interesting experiment done in the 1880s where a man, Thomas Engelmann, basically took some aerobic bacteria. That means those are, from your prefixes, you know that those are bacteria that require oxygen. And he put them on a slide, and then he took a prism and divided light. So the light actually was divided up into a rainbow, and the bacteria clustered around the blue and purple region of the light, and also in the red region of the light, and they did not occur where there was green light. Why? Because these bacteria need oxygen. There was active photosynthesis going on in either end, but not in the region where there was green light, because the light was being reflected. The molecule chlorophyll is the key component in this particular system, and chlorophyll is the molecule that is going to absorb the energy found in a photon of light, and the atom specifically that's going to absorb that energy is magnesium, which is in the center of the chlorophyll molecule. And you may wonder how that happens. Well, if you remember, when an atom gains energy, the electrons are going to get boosted to a higher energy shell. And if you remember, magnesium, which is right here in the bottom part of the periodic table right here, it is in column 2, which means look at how many valence electrons it has. It has how many? That's right, 2. Those 2 electrons are going to get a boost in energy, and they are going to go down what we call the electron transport chain, which you will see shortly in our next lecture. Okay, anyways, I'll talk about this later, but the molecules of the molecules of chlorophyll are arranged in little tiny systems on the thylakoid membrane, and energy is going to be absorbed by the chlorophyll molecules, and it will be basically passed on from molecule to molecule until it reaches a special reaction center chlorophyll molecule, which we'll talk about in our next. And we're going to get into the electron transport chain. I just wanted to show you this, and that's what we will be discussing in detail later. That's it, guys. Have a good one.